zeolite works through the swap mechanism. It's got a cage-like structure, which is one of the features, because a lot of other binders are just adsorbing or attaching toxic elements to the surface and not securing them in a cage. The zeolite has these cages, and in the cage is potassium, sodium, calcium, magnesium, these electrolytes. And when the zeolite particle comes across a heavier element, which are more toxic elements like heavy metals, it swaps what it has, which is the electrolyte, for the heavier element. And now you have this toxic element trapped in the zeolite cage where it's excreted from the body.
Welcome to the TBD Fit Podcast on Dr. Talks. I'm your host, Daniel Keeley, and I will be guiding you through this wellness journey in terms of optimizing health and longevity, where we unpack the science, the do's, the don'ts, and everything in between. Come join us. Look forward to seeing you inside. I'm your host, Daniel Keeley. I'm a functional medicine practitioner. Today, we're exploring a fascinating topic around detoxification, particularly heavy metals, and how to support the body safely with natural solutions. I'm thrilled to welcome Jeff Hoyt from Zeolite Labs. Jeff has extensive experience in detoxification science and has helped countless individuals safely manage toxins and heavy metals using zeolite, a natural mineral with remarkable properties. I can definitely attest to that. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, I'm so happy to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
I love starting every episode with an origin story, why you're doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, absolutely. It started with just personal health challenges. So, growing up, had some issues very early on, just traumatic birth experience, just starting from the very beginning. And then kind of recovered a little bit, was pretty normal during childhood, started having some more issues kind of high school, and then just started going down, just developing basically autoimmunity and some, just a lot of issues right at the end of high school into college. And then was really just having a lot of issues for a number of years, got into kind of functional medicine. I went the traditional route, like so many of your listeners probably have as well. And, a lot of the doctors were saying there's nothing wrong with you, or it's just stress, or it's, here's a psychiatrist, go talk to them or whatever. And then one of my buddies said, well, why don't you go try to talk to my doctor? He said, he's not covered by insurance and he's really expensive. I said, all right, great. But it was a functional medicine practitioner. And that was my introduction to functional medicine. And I went to this individual, and I was living in Hawaii at the time. So this was an MD in Hawaii, functional medicine practitioner. And he introduced me kind of into this realm of functional medicine, where there was some additional lab testing that wasn't covered by insurance, but it was different than what I had done before. And it was just very interesting to me. And I ended up going to work for a food sensitivity laboratory from there, because the test he recommended to me, I took. I thought it was cool. I went and worked for him. Then I was working with a lot of functional medicine practitioners as my clients. And then I started doing some training myself. So functional diagnostic nutrition, I started doing a master's in functional medicine, just starting trying to learn myself. Then I got into the supplement industry, because that was another fascinating kind of industry to me, because there's all these supplements out there. And I'm like, I don't know about this stuff, right? And it's interesting, because the way I look at it is most of these products they're marketing companies and they're selling supplements, right? And then you have supplement companies that are really what we're looking for, right? People that is it profit first or is it people first? And a lot of these companies are profit over people, and that's where there can be challenges. So I was looking at these ingredients and saying, why are some of I'm looking at through ingredient manufacturers. I said, why are some of these ingredients 20 times the cost of others? And then I realized there really is an incredible difference in quality between products. And I launched my first brand. This was 10 years ago. And I was just selling nutraceutical extracts, polysaccharide extracts. So my focus was immune regulation through polysaccharides. So essentially in nature, when you're looking at adaptogenic herbs and you're looking at immune regulatory things like medicinal mushrooms, beta glucans and things, it's the polysaccharides within these substances that are generally responsible for the immune regulatory and adaptogenic properties. So I kind of got into that science of polysaccharides and saccharides, and I could essentially look at the saccharide structure of a plant and tell you some of its medicinal properties just based on its structure. So through glycobiology, super cool. I got into that, was selling a lot of these immune regulating substances. And I discovered that there's great products, but they needed to be taken at the proper dose. And so I got into kind of therapeutic dosing, because when you're looking at the label of a lot of supplements, it's just such a general recommendation. It's not designed for you. It's just the companies have to put something on these labels, right? It doesn't mean it's what you need. And generally it's the minimum amount needed to have an effect for a healthy person. So it's generally, if someone has a chronic health condition, generally not going to work. So when I was looking at these nutraceutical extracts, sometimes people needed 50 times the amount that was located on the label to get the therapeutic effect, according to the published research on these extracts. So I got into basically quality and quantity. We need the right quality product. We need to take it at the right dose, and then we're going to get the proper results. So I was getting good results with these. The challenge was it was very expensive because of the dosing and the quality of the products. And then I said, okay, this is great. What else is out there? And then I got into technology, and I started getting in, biohacking, or, whatever you want to call it, wellness optimization technology. I opened up a center. I was, utilizing, full body, red light therapy, cryotherapy, oxygen therapy, hydrogen, PEMF, neurofeedback, biplate compression, all of the kind of standard biohacking tech. And this was all great as well. But the problem, in my mind at least, was people had to continue coming back. When they stopped coming in, they started feeling bad again. So it was helping them deal with the toxic stressors in daily life, but it wasn't removing internal sources of toxicity so that their baseline was better when, after the program than when they started. So, and there was some improvement, but generally they just ended up where they started. So I said, now we need to focus on detox. So then it brought me into my detox journey. And I thought we were detoxing, right? We're using saunas. I've been selling humic and fulvic and bioactive carbon products for 10 years. And I thought those were incredible, which I still like. I think they are great. But there's just another level of detox, because what I discovered is detox is harder than people think. It's simpler than people think, but it's harder than people think. Because if someone has a complex health challenge, a lot of times their body doesn't want to let go of the toxic elements. The body is keeping these heavy metals and toxins in tissue as a self-defense mechanism to reduce the inflammatory load and immune response to have circulating toxicity. So when I was using, chelation, like synthetic chelators, and some of these methods, that even the natural methods, they were so harsh that people could not tolerate the detox. They were not able to continue, and it was very inefficient. And I just continued looking. I was utilizing the technology. I was utilizing these supplements. And then I started playing around with zeolite. And I immediately knew that there was something different about this compound, right? People were getting very interesting results, but still a lot of people were having terrible reactions. And then I started experimenting with dose, because I had the background in therapeutic dosing from my other company, where I knew that sometimes you needed these higher doses. And I said, what would happen if I started people on a higher dose instead of microdosing it? And I started experimenting, and people stopped getting the reactions. So, and it's counterintuitive, because we're taught, you start slow, work your way up, low and slow, titrate from low to high. But with zeolite, what I've discovered is the higher the dose you take, the gentler it is. And we can get into that a little bit later. But that's essentially how I got to where I am at. I discovered zeolite, started playing around with it, discovered the dosing, then ended up developing a product, because I wasn't too pleased with most of the options on the market. And now I'm selling that product and basically offering information on how to use it most effectively.
So pain drives purpose. See, N of one, you've had to solve your own pain, and went kind of all different ways. But what has really struck a chord is, within your remarks early on here, is taking the matter into your own hands, but at a very, very myopic, detailed, high level. You were really trying to connect the dots, but ultimately diving deep into each lane, which I find unique. I don't know if that's typical of your character. like I see you're going all in it. But the interesting part is, like, you're going deep into the research, into the science, into the understanding. And when you made a remark, about the number of supplements on the market now, I think it's in the six figures. I mean, anyone can push a product ultimately, because it's not FDA regulated necessarily. And so, unfortunately, there's a lot of, let's call it, just garbage out there, or what's not contained on the label, whether it's in higher amounts or lower amounts. The studies are analytical in that regard. When they were looking at many supplements, whether it was from Walgreens or Walmart, and many that were contaminated with other products that were not even on the label, some nowhere near even in the dosing contained on the label, some devoid completely of the dosing contained on the label. And it's interesting, because when you mentioned about therapeutic dosing, you said as when the RDA kind of puts out their guidelines, it's often grossly insufficient. And if you are to make a change, and a lot of patients they're very, very shocked when they're, having to take some of these things multiple times a day. I have a stress sleep reset, and I'm doing therapeutic dosing. I'm literally dosing every single waking hour of the day to make a dramatic shift in someone's circadian biology to optimize and restore function. So what I really appreciate from your opening remarks is how you look at things, how well you're learned, and how well you've had to, I guess, dive deep into the to the research yourself in order to. I know we were speaking offline very, very briefly, but nonetheless, how we. I don't like guessing, I like testing and treating, and as such, that's what you were doing in terms of your implementation, engaging in a specific treatment plan, testing, and then retesting and testing and retesting to assess for efficacy. Okay, so going down now into this segue into detoxification, why are we, what's going on here in our environment? If you can maybe speak to that first. Are our livers becoming weaker? Are the metals becoming stronger? Is our environment becoming more toxic and polluted? What's going on with our health here?
Yeah, I think it's a two-parter. I think it's a combination of both. One, it's the external, the increased level of external toxicity that we're clearly facing in the 21st century. There's just more toxicity than ever. And these are things that can bioaccumulate in the body. And these are also other forms of toxicity, such as electromagnetic frequencies and other stressors that are not necessarily accumulating, but they're stressing out our body and maybe taking up some of the detox energy that our body could otherwise use towards detoxing some of the environmental toxins. So we've got this increased external source of stress. When I say stress, I like to just classify it as anything that makes the body work harder than normal to stay balanced, right? So that can be physical toxicants, that can be emotional, that can be anything. So we've got these increased external stressors. And then when our bodies are not working optimally, there's a reduced ability to handle those stressors, right? The problem is when our bodies aren't able to process and clear all of the toxins that are coming in on a daily basis. So let's just say, for example, that I'm exposed to 100 units of toxicity from all sources of toxicity. And if my natural detox capacity is able to clear all 100 units of toxicity, I'm not going to have bioaccumulation. They might be stressing me out short term when they're exposed. Maybe I'm not feeling great, but it's not necessarily causing the deeper level chronic conditions where bioaccumulation of metals could cause. Now, if my detox capacity is at 90%, where I'm only clearing 90 out of the 100 units of toxicity coming every day, I'm storing, my body is storing 10 units of toxicity every single day. And over a number of years, that can be quite a large number. So essentially, we have to look at things. I like to look at things from the body's perspective. Why is the body doing what it's doing? And then I like to develop protocols to work with the body's natural processes opposed to fighting against it. So when we're exposed to a toxic element, it is a very stressful experience. The body is designed to remove toxic elements from the body, right? So, but why does the body store toxic metals in the brain and these other organs? It's actually protect you. It's not to harm you. Because let's say you're exposed to mercury. Let's say you eat 3 pounds of swordfish for some reason or something, right? You just have this enormous amount of mercury coming in your body. Your body's immediately going to go after it, try to clean it up, get out as much as possible. But whatever your body is not able to handle, if there's any excess, the body says, we can't just leave this mercury floating around because it's causing an immune reaction. It's causing an inflammatory response. It's just causing a lot of stress. So we have to do something with it. It tucks it into tissue, right? So maybe that's just a general tissue. Maybe that's, maybe ends up in a vital organ, whatever it is, it's in tissue because the body has natural toxin storage, which is fat cells. So ideally, when you're exposed to toxicity, your body handles it, clears it, it's gone. But if you're exposed to more toxicity than you can handle, then your body stores it. And this could be every single day accumulation, or it could just be, once every few months you have a high exposure and your body just tucks a little bit away. So that's, I think, how we become toxic. One, we are bombarded with toxic elements. I like to say, the food, water, and air is not what it used to be. And then we've got, tons of the, personal care products and all sorts of stuff. And I think one of the largest sources of toxicity that is most overlooked is the internal production of toxicity. Because when we look at the daily dose of toxins, the total amount of toxicity that you're exposed to on a daily basis, we're almost exclusively focused on what's coming from outside, from the personal care products, the food, the water, the air, the environment. But what we're not as focused on is the toxic elements that are being produced and recycled within our own bodies. Because our bodies are toxin factories, right? We have metabolic waste products like ammonia, urea. We have all these things our bodies are generating, which is totally normal and fine. But if our body can't clear them effectively, we can have problems. And then we have the recycled toxicity. So let's say we have, a lot of external exposure. We end up with a clogged up liver. And now we have excess toxicity stored in our liver, which is a filter. When the liver produces bile after a meal or with heat or exercise or whatever, the bile is now toxic. So the bile is carrying toxicity that was stored in the liver through the bile. It ends up in the small intestine, and the body is designed to recycle most of its bile. So up to 95% of the bile is recycled through enterohepatic recirculation. So it goes back into the liver. So what happens essentially is we have this toxicity in our liver. It gets carried out into the small intestine, and now it's kind of exposed. It's basically like deactivated toxicity in the liver. Then it gets activated where our body's kind of responding to it in the small intestine, and then it gets recycled. And we're basically poisoning ourselves every single day with our own toxicity. So that's another source I don't think we talk about enough, is recycled toxicity. And then the internal production. And it's all comes down to how well is our body able to handle toxicity. If the healthier you are, the better your natural detox function is going to be. When someone becomes more chronically ill, they just have more things that are using up energy in the body, and the body doesn't have as much energy to allocate towards detox. And that's where some of these external sources and internally produced toxins can be problematic.
That was a beautiful representation on not only the process, but our modern environment, how that's shaping how well we are, or perhaps unwell we are circulating, recirculating, how well we're dealing with the toxic burden. Certainly, this is becoming quite inundating as I think it's estimated now closer to 100 to 200 million pounds of chemicals in circulation in the US alone. So the numbers are startling. And while the EPA was approved to perform testing in regards to the contamination, cross contamination, and how these chemicals interplay with each other, so there's not a single study that has been done in the last decade to do that. So we understand the damage in isolation, but yet no one is really understanding this chemical soup of toxicity that now we reside in. And so when I use a kind of a cup model with my patients, it's almost like we're just kind of over, right? We have holes that are poked in all over the place, but we're just spilling out toxins from left, right, and center. The reality is our bodies are designed to deal with that burden. But the problem is, as you said, even from one exposure, I know you referenced as a kind of example, 3 pounds of swordfish, right? A lot of these toxic metals, if you will, heavy metals are being very much accumulated in some of these larger fish, which while it's a staple of our nutrition, and certainly I believe should be a staple of our nutrition, the problem is how we almost think that, ignorance is bliss, or the terms of it's out of sight, out of mind. We got to do something with our garbage. And unfortunately, in our landfills, and then now the corporations that are dumping into these bodies of water, which accumulates in the fish, and now even in some smaller fish, which I see in the Great Lakes here in the Midwest, relevant to where we reside. The burden is cumbersome. So comes in the solution. Let's highlight the product of today's episode, the zeolite. So let's identify it, identify its roles. Let's dive deep into all things zeolite.
If you've ever felt like your body's carrying a little too much of today's toxic load, this sponsor of today's episode is definitely worth knowing about. ZeoCharge is a supercharged zeolite powder that acts as a smart binder, meaning it helps bind and remove unwanted toxins like heavy metals, mycotoxins, and metabolic waste without stripping away essential nutrients that your body requires. Zeolite is a naturally occurring mineral with a unique cage-like structure and negative charge that attracts positively charged toxins from food, water, air, and even internally produced waste. The goal is simple: help calm the storm in an overworked system by reducing the toxic burden. For listeners of this podcast, you can learn more at zeolitelabs.com/zeolite discount. Again, that's zeolite labs.com/zeolite discount.
Absolutely. So basically, what zeolite is, it's a naturally occurring mineral. So it's a volcanic mineral, and what makes it unique is that it is a negative charge, which makes it attracted to positively charged elements. And most of these toxic elements, the toxicants and things that we want out of our bodies, are positively charged. So it works. It's a binder, is what it is. So there's a number of binders on the market, and I'm a big fan of binders. You've got like activated charcoal is a classic example. You've got clays, you've got all this stuff, and they all have their place. Zeolite's just a little bit different. One of the things that makes it different is that it works through a swap mechanism instead of just a mop up mechanism. So when you take something like an activated charcoal or a clay, generally it goes in and it just grabs everything. And it can be very helpful. So, I mean, charcoal's even used in emergency rooms for drug overdoses because it just effectively grabs all sorts of stuff. But for long-term use, that might be problematic because it could potentially be stripping some nutrients. It might be causing some issues like constipation, and it's just not really designed for long-term. Zeolite works through the swap mechanism. So it's got a cage-like structure, which is one of the features because a lot of other binders are just adsorbing or attaching toxic elements to the surface and not securing them in a cage. The zeolite has these cages, and in the cage is potassium, sodium, calcium, magnesium, these electrolytes. And when the zeolite particle comes across a heavier element, which are more toxic elements like heavy metals, it swaps what it has, which is the electrolyte, for the heavier element. And now you have this toxic element trapped in the zeolite cage where it's excreted from the body. So it's got these cages which help make it a more efficient detox, and it works with the swap mechanism as well. And then one of the other main advantages of zeolite over some other binders is that it has an incredible level of surface area, just overall more binding capacity, essentially. So there's just way more ability to grab more toxic elements than some of the traditional binders out there. So what it would, I mean, I guess I should talk a little bit more about it. What does it bind to, right? So it's binding to, I said positively charged elements, but it binds to a lot of things. So it binds to heavy metals. It binds to environmental toxicants. It's been shown to bind to glyphosate, BPA. It's been shown to bind to mycotoxins. It's even been used commercially for binding to radioactive materials like radioactive cesium and strontium-137. It was used in Chernobyl to clean up the environment very effectively from the nuclear waste. It was used, so kind of the history, first it was used industrially to clean up mostly water. So there's a lot of research on zeolite in water, and that's where we get a lot of the direct binding capacity studies from, like cleaning up BPA and glyphosate and things from water supplies. And then it was used for animals, and it was mixed in with the animal feed, primarily to bind to microtoxins like aflatoxins and ochratoxin A. And interestingly, and this is another benefit of zeolite, it can be taken with food, whereas most binders have to be taken on an empty stomach. And this is because of that selective nature of the zeolite particle, where it's not depleting essential nutrients. So even in the animal studies, when they were mixing high doses of zeolite in with the animal feed, not only was it not depleting nutrients, but the blood tests were showing increased nutrient levels. Because as you're removing the heavy metals and toxic elements, the body's better able to utilize and absorb the nutrients. So there's a number of advantages to it, but it binds to a lot of different things. Also metabolic waste products. So that's what I was mentioning earlier with the internal production of toxicity. And it binds to ammonia very effectively. It binds to urea. It's able to bind to excess histamine, some nitrates. It's able to bind to a number of these things. And I think that's actually one of the main advantages of zeolite is this ability to bind to metabolic waste products. Because when someone has a toxicity problem, a lot of times they just assume it's heavy metals because they get tested or whatever. But if you have a toxicity problem, it's a general toxicity problem. So you're going to be accumulating everything that you're exposed to. And whatever you test for is probably going to show up positive, but it's not just heavy metals. You mentioned the 1 to 200 million chemicals. Whatever you're exposed to, that a lot of those things are going to be accumulating in the body. And it goes beyond. So when we're using synthetic chelators and things that are targeting specific metals, we're missing so many of the other toxic elements that may be even more problematic than the metals themselves. And then during the detox process, as you're kind of stirring things up, you're getting an increased level of metabolic waste products because the body's working harder. And with the zeolite, it's helping mop that up as well. So it's just a much more efficient detox method than a lot of the synthetic chelators. And it's just kind of a next generation version of a lot of the natural binders.
It is an absolute all-star. I can say that we've been using it very effectively within the patient population for quite some time now. Zeolite is no stranger to traditional medicine, and it's been used for hundreds and hundreds of years. Highly abundant, highly safe, non-toxic. And you mentioned, some of the metals already and some of these other environmental intoxicants. I mean, it has a very high affinity for toxic metals and low affinity for nutritional metals. So it preserves what we need. I mean, it binds to arsenic, mercury, cadmium, lead, antimony, aluminum, cesium, rubidium, thorium, nickel, uranium, newbidium. The list kind of continues. And then in terms of mycotoxins, interestingly, strong affinities for aflatoxin, AFE1 from aspergillus in greens and nuts, ochratoxin A, zearalenone. So it has a strong binding capacity, especially in the gut. I know you mentioned ammonia and its impact on cirrhosis as an example. It also binds to VOCs such as benzene, toluene, formaldehyde. the impact of air pollution is very well understood now. And it's interesting is the EPA just administered some research suggesting that our indoor air quality where we reside is 2 to 5 times more toxic than our air outdoors. So we live in this kind of like chemical soup, but it's also very much at home. We don't often neglect our internal environment from our home, and then our internal environment from our biochemistry, which we can test. Now, you mentioned, doing a heavy metal test, and people just suggesting that that's the entire toxic burden. No, we do a lot of total toxin testing, and heavy metals is yes, a notable portion, but essentially it's important to understand what we're dealing with and how there are treatment solutions that can be very hyper targeted. This is actually even interesting further. So I want to highlight the product that you have brought to market. But first, I'm curious because zeolite in its powder form that we take, it has a very, again, potent effect in terms of the accumulation of toxins in the gut. I'm curious to address also systemic exposure. And then secondly is what has also been interesting because I love the product that you have formulated. And like I said, I actually use it, find it a very, very high degree of safety and efficacy. I also added a zeolite spray. So when I've been traveling recently, I added into my immune kit a colloidal silver spray hydrosol. So you just oral administration, you spray, absorb quickly in the mucosal membrane. And I found that it has prevented me from sickness because I travel a lot, speaking at conferences, attending lectures. And really, that's kind of the one unique component that has changed is I added a silver spray and a zeolite spray. And interestingly, I've been around a lot of sick people, not only on the road, on airplanes, but also at these conferences. And somehow during this immune vulnerable time, I've been largely able to stay completely healthy, which I've been even surprised. And that's really been the only difference in terms of my routine. I don't know if you want to speak to that as well, out of curiosity, but otherwise, let's definitely highlight kind of what you brought to market as well.
Sure. So yeah, it's that's actually one of the main things people reach out and tell us is that they're just not getting sick. Like just recently, like a lot of practitioners even are saying, everyone in their practice is getting sick. Just like the last few weeks, there was something, right? And they're just saying they're the only ones not getting, even in their families, like they're taking it and it's somehow protecting them. There's a number of potential mechanisms there. One, I mean, clinoptilolite, that's another point. Clinoptilolite is the form of zeolite we're talking about here. So zeolite is a broad term. It's a mineral. We're not talking about all forms of zeolite. A lot of forms of zeolite are toxic. You've got synthetic zeolites. You've got all this stuff. We're talking about natural clinoptilolite zeolite here. But there's studies on it showing it does bind to various viral particles kind of indiscriminately. So there's that. And then I think beyond that, it's really just because it's binding to so many of these other stressors that it's just kind of emptying the cup, as kind of you said with the cup analogy, is emptying the cup. When you're exposed to something, your body now has more natural energy to deal with it. Right. So someone that is always getting sick, they're basically kind of at their threshold. Their cup is full and then anything can tip it over. So you want to empty that cup as much as possible. So then when you're exposed to things, you have extra capacity to deal with it. So very, very common with that. In terms of the question about the systemic use of zeolite. So zeocharge is a GI binder. So we don't want it working. It works systemically, but it doesn't directly interact with things in organs or in the bloodstream, right? So it's a downstream detox effect. So essentially what's happening is it's effectively binding to the toxicity in the GI tract, which is where most of the toxicity is, especially your daily dose of toxins. And then your body, if it wants to, will start letting go of the toxic elements from tissue because now there's room to receive it. Because if you're at max capacity in I call it level 1 toxicity, which is kind of your active toxicity, what you're processing. Then there's level 2 and 3 toxicity, which is the stored toxicity and the organ level toxicity. If you're at max capacity, your cup is full in level 1 all the time. Your body doesn't want to let go of these toxins from level 2 and 3 because there's no room to receive it. If your body did let go of those toxins, that's when you get terrible detox reactions, which are a sign that your body says, okay, there's more level 1 toxicity now than what we're used to. It's a little bit stressful. So if we can remove that cup first, then our body says, you know what? Now we're going to let go. So we can show that it works systemically because we did our case studies program prior to launch, where we're able to show that it was able to reduce tissue levels of 15 different heavy metals. and in most cases simultaneously increase nutrient, vitamin, and mineral status. But that doesn't, and everyone just assumes that it means it was actually going in and chelating these metals from tissue, but that's not what was happening. It was binding in the GI tract, and it was so effective in its binding capacity that it encouraged the body to naturally ramp up detox and let go of metals. And I think for me, that's the number one key to a successful long-term detox, is to get the body to do the work for you. Because essentially, when the healthier you are, the faster you detox. The more sick you become, the slower you detox. And it's as a self-defense mechanism because your body can only handle so much stress. So let's say you're at kind of your max capacity, your cup is full, your body might slow down bile production because it wants to slow down the release of toxic elements coming from the liver that are stressing you out in the small intestine and as they recirculate. It might slow down lymph flow because your body wants to keep these toxic elements tucked in tissue and in lymph opposed to releasing them. It could also result in constipation because of the reduce in bile flow, et cetera. You might stop sweating. So your body sometimes will slow down detox, especially in a chronic state, because it would prefer to keep these metals stored in tissue where they're hidden from the immune system. They're not causing the same level of inflammatory reaction or immune response. Now they're causing problems long term. We definitely want to get rid of them, but short term, it's actually protective, which is why the body does it. So as someone gets healthier, so I say that the key to an effective detox is to get healthy. However you can get healthy is going to help you detox the most. And sometimes that's even, emotional work. Sometimes it just depends on what's causing the most stress in your life and in your body. Removing that is going to optimize detox primarily. And then the body will naturally say, okay, we're going to ramp up lymph flow. We're going to ramp up bile production. We're going to start sweating more. It's just going to start detoxing naturally because now there's room to receive these toxic elements that were tucked into storage. So what ZeoCharge is doing, I like to call it a detox accelerant. It's going in, it's binding, it's calming the storm in the body, reducing the toxic stressors in level 1, the active toxicity. And then if the body wants to, it says, all right, let's let go of the toxic elements from tissue. So it's basically the exact opposite of a synthetic chelator that's going in and trying to rip something out, potentially of a tissue. And I think sometimes that's working against the body's natural process because in a relatively healthy person, it works fine. But in someone that has bioaccumulated metals over 25 years and is highly symptomatic, their body might not want to let go. No matter how strong the chelator is, if the cell does not want to let go of the metal, the cell's not going to let go of the metal because it's trying to protect you. And some people, I used to work with a specific synthetic chelator that has very strong binding affinity for mercury, and it goes to the brain. It's lipophilic, so it goes straight to the fatty tissue. And people would feel this tug of war effect. Like they could feel it tugging on their brain. And I think that's literally what was happening is the chelator was there trying to remove the mercury, but their cells just did not want to let go. And this chelator was an absolute disaster for these individuals. A healthy person would take that chelator, absolutely incredible results. And just driving the home point on this chelator, the point home on this chelator, because it's interesting. There's tons of research on this chelator, humans and animals, incredible results. It's not on the market. It's not in the market. It's still in trials. It's been used for 18 years now with great success in these trials. But when you inject a mouse, let's say with mercury, and you give it this chelator, it removes all the mercury. The mouse is fine. It's absolutely incredible. But what they didn't study, and this is what happens in humans, if the mouse would have had that mercury for 15 years and stayed alive, and then been exposed to the chelator, it would not have removed the mercury as effectively because the mercury settled in. Once the mercury settles in, it's different than when you were just exposed. So I think synthetic chelators are fantastic when you're just exposed to toxic elements, but sometimes in a chronic illness state, when you're utilizing them, your body might not be encouraged to let go of the metal because it's too stressful. And that's where the binding approach for more sensitive individuals might be the first
I think
step.
it's estimated that 65% roughly of Americans have high heavy metals, which causes skin issues, neurologic issues, Parkinson's, cardiovascular issues, certainly CVD, killing 1 in 2. Really, this is a real concern. Or still, there's autoimmunity issues over the long term, kidney disease. Um, what happens? Metals will denature enzymes, and so much of the body is pH dependent on enzymatic functions, and what matters there is minerals. But heavy metals displace minerals in cells and tissue. So interferes with cell membrane function and transport and uptake and release, and definitely creates a huge oxidative burden because of the accumulation of these free radicals. And so then you have the introduction of inflammatory cytokines and mitochondrial damage, and then worse still, DNA damage. And each metal particularly displaces specific metals. Mercury, as an example, as with magnesium, arsenic with copper, lead displaces calcium. In terms of zeolite preserving a lot of these minerals, and obviously then the affinity for the positively charged metals and binding, or as you said, you had referenced the term, how did you do it? You said it's like sweeping, if you said it originally correct?
They say calming,
For yes.
swapping,
So
swapping.
again, this very safe and gentle approach in terms of its efficacy. When we're looking, as you said, going back to detoxification, I think what you did brilliantly there was, I'm not sure if that's even intentionally, but brilliantly nonetheless, is the body doesn't make mistakes. We have this innate design, and yet we try to play God in some respects by trying to push certain pathways to change the internal state very, very aggressively. And as you said, the, one of these metals that were causing damage in some of these unhealthier patients. But needless to say, is constipation reflective of the total body burden, right? So the body responds in kind in terms of these internal external stressors. And to me, constipation is a reflection. Okay, maybe the body is healing in a way to sequester some of these intoxicants or heavy metals, as you said, things that are getting lodged in the brain, and then you have neurological dysfunction. But needless to say, affecting the gut, because that starts in the brain with the vagus nerve and how that innervates every segment of the digestive tract. And when I look at how well someone can detoxify, yes, it's dependent on phase 1 through phase 3 detoxification. Yes, there's cofactors like B vitamins, which actually you need healthy microbes to synthesize, glutathione, cysteine, magnesium, vitamin C, glycine, taurine, choline, and certainly, again, going back to these microbes, because they have a binding capacity to eliminate these microbes, whether it's Lactobacillus brevis or plantarum, each will affect very specific heavy metal that we've been exposed to. And so the body can clean up. The problem is the inundating accumulation that is ever kind of ubiquitous, right? And it's nonstop. But needless to say is, so how do we take zeocharge? Is there, you said, sometimes more equals better. Is it ever contraindicated? Like where do we start? How do we take it?
Yep, absolutely. And first I'll say I think we all have a toxicity problem to some extent, just because how we're living. And the key is to find an effective approach to get these toxic elements out of your body and to get your body's natural detox processes optimized. And like you said, there's so many factors that go into it, like the microbiome, like everything else, just getting the body working. So I like to say that zeocharge is kind of a foundation to protocols. It's not like you take zeocharge and it cures all your problems. There's no product that does that, to my knowledge. Generally, those are the companies that I don't buy from. They're marketing these, miracle products, but it's a foundation and it can be quite effective, and you build upon it with other protocols, right? So that's one of the things I like about it. So how to take it, it's very versatile, which is why it's nice. It can be taken with food. It can be taken on an empty stomach because of the selective swap mechanism of it. One of the keys is the dosing. So this is counterintuitive, because traditionally with detox, we say, let's start slow, let's work up. And when someone has, mast cell activation syndrome or chronic Lyme, mold toxicity, one of these conditions where they're very sensitive, they're generally sometimes considered too sick to detox, right? And essentially what that means is when you try to push detox, they get terrible reactions because their body says this is too much toxicity. So in individuals like that, if you microdose zeolite, it's much more likely to accelerate those detox symptoms than if you take a normal or a higher dose. So essentially what happens is when you take a microdose of zeolite, what I recommend is not taking microdoses. I like taking normal doses or higher doses. A microdose of zeolite will go in, kind of stir the pot, stir things up, kind of make a mess, but then there's not enough, all of the zeolite particles are going to be bound to something. And then there's all this other stuff floating around that was stirred up. Maybe it's through biofilm disruption, whatever mechanism it is. And now the body is left to deal with the mess. So the net effect is actually an increase on the stress load on your body, which is really the opposite purpose of a binder. The whole point of a binder is to reduce stress. You take a little bit, stirs things up, it adds stress to your body because your body has to play cleanup. If you take a higher dose, same product, you go in, you still stir things up, you still make a mess, you still disrupt biofilms, whatever, but now you have extra zeolite cages present to help clean up the mess that was generated through the detox process. And then if you took enough, the net effect is actually a reduction of stress on the body because you grabbed all this stuff and there was enough zeolite to basically do the job, and your body doesn't have to use additional resources for detox. Now, there's a 40-page document explaining all the logic behind that on the zeolitelabs.com website if anyone wants to nerd out on that. That's the super short version. But essentially, if you take like 10 milligrams of zeocharge, it's much more likely to cause a headache, irritability, joint pain, nausea than if you took 10,000 milligrams or 10 grams. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but this has been tested with hundreds and hundreds of people over a number of years, and people are usually shocked when it works, but it does. And of course, you have to be careful because anything can happen with detox. When you start stirring stuff up, anything can happen. So it's not like you can just take 6 scoops and assume that nothing's going to happen. I mean, there's always a chance of reactions. And sometimes when you take higher doses, you get an initial purging event because as you grab all these metals and things that are in biofilms or attached to parasites, your body says, you're exposed to all these, yeast and parasites, your body flushes them out and there could be an initial response. Sometimes you throw up, diarrhea, et cetera. So when you detox, anything can happen, but taking a standard dose, I don't believe zeolite was designed to be microdosed. And I think that's what's happened with a lot of products is they're these microdose products that maybe they're okay for some people, but for a sensitive individual that has a higher level of active toxicity, they just need the more active toxicity you have, the more binding capacity you need to bind it all. So it's just basically a pretty simple formula. If you're pretty healthy, you don't need as much. The sicker or more toxic you are, the more you need because there's more stuff to bind.
Again, very, very elegantly put because we don't recognize too, and going back to what I had remarked previously in terms of constipation, which I think afflicts so many people, and yet we normalize that, right? What we've done is when you said everyone is toxic, I just had a meeting with a physician yesterday who we're going to be adding to our team. I mean, even myself, right? And while many of us practice what we preach, it's just our modern environment. It's very, very difficult, right? But the body is very good at being able to eliminate. The problem, again, begins our dietary habits, our inadequate sleep or interrupted sleep, just stress completely crippling the entire system. And while we are all toxic, we begin to normalize the abnormal, right? So it's constipation. First, we go every other day, then we go every 2 days, then every 3 days. And that's just normal for someone. And you go to your GI and they say, well, that's normal for you. What? Absolutely not. You're recycling toxicity. And so the body is responding in kind because its biosecretion is perhaps less or inadequate, or as you said, enterohepatic recirculation. And so going back to the liver to say, okay, we need to help detoxify more, but yet we don't want to push because that's going to sound the alarms and your nervous system is so dysregulated because you're constantly stuck in fight or flight because of your poor relationship or again, fill in the blank. And so it's this full circle that just keeps us unfortunately stuck. But the good part is when you're able to intervene with therapeutic dosing, right? So when you said not these necessarily microdoses, and there are certain things that we will microdose with patients. There are other things that we need therapeutic dosing with patients and able to adjust to the patient profile so we can enhance their clinical outcomes. But needless to say is, so in terms of timing, right? You spoke about in terms of dosing. I remember once upon a time, so when I was doing your product and I was doing testing pre and post, which I did find a great degree of benefit from, I was dosing, I started with 1 scoop at night, working up to 2 or maybe even 3 scoops before bed. What about the timing? What about the quantity? And what about the demographic? Meaning, now that we're working with a lot of children, how does dosing apply there?
Yeah. And I just thought of one more thing to drive home the dosing point, just kind of a visual illustration I'm going to quickly illustrate. So back to the cup. I like you said you use that cup analogy a lot. So if your cup is full and you do another, like a stimulating herb or something to release toxicity or pull toxicity from tissue, you're adding to that cup. Your cup is active toxicity, your daily stress threshold. If that cup overflows, you get symptoms. So when people are considered too sick to detox, they do these other approaches that overflow their cup. They feel terrible. The more of those products, the higher dose of those products you take, the more the cup is going to overflow, the worse you feel. So you want to start with low doses of those. The higher dose approach does not work for other detoxes. So I want to make sure people understand that. This is specifically for ZeoCharge, because ZeoCharge is working by the exact opposite mechanism, where instead of going in and adding things to the cup, it's grabbing things from the baseline cup. So the more you take, so if you take a little bit and you remove 1% of the stuff from the cup, but it stimulates detox, maybe more stuff gets dumped into the cup, you get a reaction. If you took a high dose and it grabbed everything out of that cup, even if your body starts dumping more stuff into the cup, there's room to receive it. So the more you take, the more you're removing the cup. So that's kind of that's why it's just, maybe that's helpful. So it's just the opposite of other things. So in terms of the next question, so for dosing and timing and demographics, so a good starting dose for people, I say, and this is for an average, 150 pound person generally, is about 2 scoops, which is 10 grams, that 10,000 milligram mark I mentioned, and taking that one time per day, not splitting it to start with, because a lot of people think that if they split the dose, it's going to work better because, it's grabbing to toxins twice in the day. Starting off, we recommend the one time per dose because we want to make sure we're getting enough to deplete or empty that cup on a single dose. Because let's say you do 1 scoop and it's a little bit stressful on your body and you do that twice a day, now you've stressed out your system twice. If you do 2 scoops, it might not be stressful on your body. So it's not a cumulative effect. You want to get enough on each dose. And some people need higher doses. I mean, some people take much higher doses, but 2 to 6 scoops is kind of the recommended starting point. For sensitive individuals, especially if you're generally healthy, you can start with 1. But we recommend starting with higher doses and working down. So like, for example, we have a protocol. It's a 5-month detox protocol where, and when I say detox, this is another important key. It's detox through binding. So what it's doing is it's a binding protocol, which encourages the body to detox. So that's why people that are too sick to detox generally can tolerate it, because it's binding and encouraging detox, not forcing detox. But with our protocol, it's called the Ultimate Zeolite Experience. You start with 6 scoops per day. So you take 6 scoops once per day. You do that for a month. The next month, you do 5 scoops per day. Then you do 4 scoops. Then you do 3. Then you do 2. Then you're done. Then you can maintain at 1 or you can be done with the protocol. And essentially, as you peel off layers of toxicity, you don't need as much. The healthier you become, the less you need. Now, some people need to maintain on higher doses. So let's say they go from 6, they're feeling great. 5, they're feeling great. They go to 4 scoops. They're not feeling great. They just bump back up to 5, right? So if you start feeling bad as you work down, go back up. You can also do an accelerated version of that protocol. If you don't think you need the full 5 months, you could do 6 scoops for a week, 5 scoops the next week, 4 scoops the next week, 3 scoops, 2, and then just maintain on 2 for as long as you're doing the protocol. So that's kind of what we've designed to try to mitigate some of those initial detox responses, to reduce the chance of them. And then we recommend, if someone is very sensitive, if you're on that, I call it the 5M, the 4 or 5M spectrum: mold, metal, magnetic field, microbe, and maybe mental emotional sensitivity. So if you have those 5 M's, then you're generally very sensitive to detox. And I would recommend that you take it after a meal, right? Because if you're taking it first thing in the morning on an empty stomach, it's most likely to cause a detox reaction. 1, because it's got a stronger biofilm disrupting of properties. So there's more likelihood of microbial toxicity to occur. And the zeolite is not directly binding to a lot of the pathogens. It's just exposing the pathogens to the body's cleanup crew. And that's why some of those detox reactions are unavoidable, because it's just exposing them. The body has to do the work. So the detox reactions we want to avoid in any detox are the redistribution of heavy metals, where you go in, you stir stuff up, the metals find a new home. That's a bad detox reaction. The Herxheimer reaction, where you're getting just kind of an excess release of like lipopolysaccharides or something from microbial release, sometimes that's an unavoidable reaction, but that doesn't mean you're adding any bioaccumulation of toxicity. So it's okay. You just still want to minimize it as much as possible. And zeolite does bind to lipopolysaccharides, by the way. So that's another helpful aspect. So if you're sensitive, I recommend taking it after dinner, less likely to cause a reaction, and it's a good starting point. And a lot of practitioners recommend taking it 30 to 60 minutes after dinner anyway, especially for liver health, because if your liver is toxic, then after your biggest meal, you're probably getting the biggest bile dump, which means you're releasing the most toxicity from your liver into the small intestine. And if you take the ZeoCharge 30 to 60 minutes after a meal, you're grabbing, it's basically like a biofilter. You're going in, the zeolite's entering the small intestine and it's grabbing the toxicity contained in the bile so it doesn't recirculate. So I think that's one of, I always do that. I always take 6 scoops after dinner, about 30 minutes after dinner for that purpose. I also take another 6 scoops in the morning, just because I'm extreme, but I don't recommend that for people. It's not necessary. It's a little bit overkill. If you do take more than you need, you're basically wasting product. That's the good news. It's not a biochemical, it's not a nutrient. It's not bioavailable. It's simply passing through. It's inert and it's leaving the body. So you can't technically overdose on it. I mean, you can overdose on anything if you take like way too much, but it's not like working on any biochemical pathway. It's simply passing through, grabbing and leaving. So if you take more than you need, essentially you're going to have unused zeolite particles that you just poop out. So that's the good news. If you don't take enough, then there might be a stressful detox. And one more note on that, when people ask about the side effects, there's technically no side effects of zeolite because it doesn't have this, it's not working on any specific pathway. It's not a nutrient. There's only reactions to the product. And those reactions could be anything because it depends on what's been mobilized and how your body is responding to this binding and detox process. So there's reactions to the product or detox reactions, but there's like not a list of side effects. That's why anything could happen. You could feel incredible. You could feel terrible. It's all based on what is happening in your body. So the last part of your question, demographics, and you can stop me at any point if I'm rambling, but taking it for sensitive individuals, I would say take it after a meal. That's going to be fantastic. And then if you're more flexible, if you're pretty healthy, you're not prone to detox reactions, you can take it whenever you want. Take it first thing in the morning, take it before bed, take it after a meal. Probably not going to matter. If you do get a reaction, then just double the dose. If you take 1 scoop and you think that's enough, but then you end up with a headache, then maybe it wasn't quite enough for you starting off, go to 2 scoops the next day. For children, there's very little research, published research on the use of zeolite for children. So we usually don't market it for children. Having said that, there are many, many children that take it based on the parents' discretion. I would say it personally, off the record, is probably one of the safer. If you're going to be detoxing a child, it's because it's binding. It's generally pretty inert, pretty safe for children. They get generally good effects. But it's one of those things we can't really make official dosing recommendations and things because there's just limited research on it. Children generally do well with any dose because they have less accumulated toxicity, they have less emotional stressors, they have less going on, and they're less likely to experience the reactions. But the same rule applies. If they do experience a reaction, it might be worth trying to raise the dose. And I mean, some children take pretty high doses, but it's all parent discretion and just figuring out, is it something that they need? Like for children, it's always like you don't want to give anyone more than what they need, right? You want to have the least amount of stuff to get the job done without overburdening a system with 50 to 100
And your
supplements.
definition of stress early on was what again?
Anything that makes the body work harder than normal
Maybe a lot of
to stay
what we don't
balanced.
need. Needless to say, so I wanted to. Okay, so
Yeah.
all of that was beautiful. So to go full circle, 6 scoops. It's a 6-month challenge, right? So first month you do start with 6 scoops though.
Yep. So you start high because people are going to be tempted to start low. Now, the whole point of this is there's two reasons. One, to reduce the stress on the body because higher doses are gentler because you're grabbing more of the toxicity from your bucket, less likely to cause the reactions. So you want to start high and work down. The second reason is because in our case studies program prior to launching, we found that at 6 scoops, that's the dose that was able to encourage the deep level, tissue level metal detox in everyone. Because sometimes if you take 1 scoop or you take 2 scoop and you take these other binders and they make you feel incredible, people assume, well, this is because it's detoxing metals from my brain. Probably not. What makes you feel great is that it is short term. If you feel incredible right away, it's not because it's detoxing metals from your brain. It's because it's binding to this toxicity in your GI tract that's causing strong immune and inflammatory responses every single day. As you bind to that, it calms things down. Your body can breathe and you feel better. The next step, so that's binding. That's the binding dose. The next step is, does your body want to then release toxic elements from the brain and from organs for release? To feel the benefit of that, usually that's a multi-month process. So when people are removing mercury and other toxins from the central nervous system, It usually takes them 3 to 6 months to start feeling better from that specific metal removal. Whereas if they feel better on day one, which is not uncommon, it's because they're the binding. So on one scoop, on two scoops, some people feel really good and they continue taking it, even sometimes for, 4, 5, 6 months or a year. They feel incredible, but they might not even be detoxing. They think they're detoxing. They might be on that level one, just cup removal detox, but it might not be enough to encourage the body to let go. So let's say they take one scoop and it removes 25% of what's in the cup, and they feel better because they're no longer overflowing. Because some people have an overflowing cup every single day, even if they don't take any supplements. So they're experiencing detox reactions just based on their daily dose of toxicity. So it just by taking a small dose can put you under that threshold. You feel better, but it might not be enough where the body says, okay, let's let go of more tissue or more metals from tissue into the cup. There might not be enough room. Let's say you took 3 scoops or 4 scoops and it emptied the cup completely or emptied the cup by 70, 80%. You still feel incredible, but then the body says, okay, now there's more room. Let's dump this mercury from the brain. And then sometimes, and this is interesting, sometimes people feel incredible for a month and then all of a sudden they feel terrible. And that's because they've transitioned from this binding dose to the detox dose. Because sometimes it takes a little bit of time for the body to get in a groove or to feel comfortable to let go, because it's not a forceful detox. It's an encouragement for the body to detox. So there's cycles. Detox is cyclical, where the body will release some toxic elements. It becomes too stressful. It kind of slows down. And then it's a cyclical effect. So most people, I think, feel different throughout the month. People that are sensitive, at least, have different symptoms. And they're always trying to identify, what did I do differently to feel differently? But a lot of times it doesn't have anything to do with what you did differently. It has to do with your body's natural detox rhythm and just various biochemical reactions that are occurring in your body without anything different that you did. And of course, then you've got like the moon and the weather cycles and all these other things that are influencing biochemistry. So it's always, people are always trying to figure out what they did differently. Sometimes you didn't do anything differently. The body is doing something differently for you.
Over the course of the next 6 months, start at 6, or again, if you're aggressive, as I am. So first week, 6 scoops, second week, 5 scoops, then you go down to 1 scoop, and then that's kind of maintenance dose, or what happens after that?
Yep. So in your case, you're probably not going to need to be on 6 scoops for a month, right? Because you're pretty good. Like, you're probably cleaner than your average patient type of situation. So yeah. So for you, doing 6 for 1 week is probably great. 5, 4, 3, and then maintain on 1 to 2. And then for someone that has maybe more layers of toxicity or more internally stored toxins, then they might want to do the full month on the 6 scoops and then the full month on the 5. And then the goal is for the body to be able to better handle the metabolic waste products and these other things on their own. And there's other issues as well, which when they're working with you, they're addressing. Because, for example, if you have this microbial overgrowth and you've got, the dysbiosis, then you're getting an increased production of lipopolysaccharides, and ammonia is a metabolic waste product produced by not only yourself, but also, yeast and these other microbes. As you start clearing that and balancing that, your daily dose of toxicity from internal production starts going down, and then you don't need as much zeolite, right? So it's like, if you're combining the zeolite with effective protocols like what you're offering, you might not need to stay on that high dose very long, and maybe not at all. So maybe, like, if they're doing all this other stuff with you, maybe they just go straight to 2 scoops and they say that's enough. And then if it's not, they just go to 4 scoops type of situation. So for people that are like working with you, they're doing testing, they're more flexible in their dosing. I designed the 5-month protocol, the 6-5-4-3-2, for people that are kind of doing this on their own, and they're not testing every single month to make sure it's working. Because in our case studies program, we were testing people monthly, and we saw that when people started on 6 scoops, every single person except for one ever, we had one person in all time that was not able to detox mercury, no matter the dose. And she had also done like 100 other products and never was able to detox. But that's because her body just would not let her detox mercury, because she had serious like heart issues. And so it just shows you the body won't detox if it doesn't want to detox certain things from tissue. But she detoxed the other 14 metals, but the mercury just would not move. And we tested her after like 2 years even, and the mercury was the exact same level. It was very interesting. So it just shows you kind of the body's innate intelligence. But other than that, and that's a very extreme case. Other than that, every single person was able to remove or reduce the levels of all 15 metals when they started on 6 scoops. And then as they work down, they don't have to stay on 6 scoops because the body started getting the detox ball rolling. And even when they reduced the dose to 5, 4, 3, 2, they continued detoxing the whole time. And then their body's in that detox rhythm. And then they can maintain on 1 or 2 scoops and their body continues detoxing. And ideally, you go off of it and your body continues detoxing. It's just that sometimes it stops based on your level of health and your external exposure. So some people choose to stay on it just because there's so much, like you said, we're in a toxic environment. Some people choose to do it 3 months out of the year after the initial protocol. It just depends. If you go off of it and you feel terrible after 5 months or after 1 month or whatever, then that's a sign that it was reducing that level 1 toxicity. And when you went off of it, your body's back to overflowing again.
Any contraindications?
So it'd be helpful to go back on. So we don't recommend taking it during pregnancy. And there's a lot of companies out there that say, take zeolite during pregnancy. No validation. Most of the information on the internet is incorrect. I'll just say that. Just on every topic, basically, I'd say most of the information is incorrect. But we do not recommend taking it during pregnancy due to lack of research. That's during breastfeeding, we would say the same thing. A lack of research. It's one of those things where they would want to work with you or their practitioner on that one. Because if the breast milk is clean, you don't want to take something that could potentially stimulate the release of toxic elements into the breast milk that are then going to the baby. If the breast milk is already not clean and they're already passing toxic elements to the child, maybe it's worth it to try to reduce the level of circulating toxicity. That's case by case. It's kind of hard to say what's going to happen based on the individual's response to detox. But we say our official response is definitely no for pregnancy, no for breastfeeding. But with anything, consult a practitioner because there's so many things that can happen when you detox. And we a lot of times I'll just say we think we're smarter than we really are and it's not that we're not smart, but a lot of people, they're like, this is going to happen because of this. There's thousands of these reactions that can occur in your body that we cannot anticipate. We just can't do it. There's no way to know your exact response to a product, no matter how much you research it, no matter, how brilliant you really are. It's just hard. So that's where it's, working with the practitioner and doing lab testing to actually see what's going on biochemically, not just heavy metals testing, but other biomarker testing to identify what is the general response to the product. So a lot of people will do, liver enzyme testing and various tests to identify, how am I responding? And if it is stressing them out, then it's like, okay, now we need to take a break, let the body reset. If it's reducing stress on the body and their liver enzymes are improving, maybe keep on it. Like a lot of people go off of it and their biomarkers get worse because it was actually reducing stress on the body and all their markers were getting better. Other people, it's the opposite. So it's all based on when you're taking the product, is the net effect reduction in stress or addition in stress? And it's just going to be different for each person. So it's tricky. But the pregnancy, breastfeeding for contraindications, and then any medical condition is one of those things you want to check with the practitioner, make sure it's something that's going to work well with your current protocol. It is a strong binder, so it will bind to things like medication. So antibiotics, for example, if you're on an antibiotic protocol, zeolite will bind to antibiotics. So you don't want to take an antibiotic and then take zeolite at the exact same time because it will bind to some of the antibiotics and then those won't be utilized by the body type of thing. So there's that. There's limited interaction studies on other medications. The main thing to be aware of, it's less about the direct interaction of the zeolite with the medication, and it's more about, does the dose of the medication need to be adjusted based on other biological responses in the body? So for example, if someone is on a synthetic thyroid hormone due to a sluggish thyroid, and maybe part of the reason the thyroid is sluggish is because there's mercury that is in the thyroid, which is very common, especially if you've had amalgam fillings because of the proximity of the thyroid to the mouth. And then if you start taking ZeoCharge and you start cleaning up that metal from the thyroid, maybe the thyroid starts working better. You get the natural production of the thyroid hormones working. The dose of the thyroid medication might need to be decreased. So these are all things to consider. Same with insulin. A lot of times the ZeoCharge has a strong blood sugar lowering effect. So if you're on insulin, that you just have to monitor these things because there's just so many things that can happen. It's a very powerful product, right? And if you have one toxic element that's floating around in your body every day, that's just causing tons of stress, and you bind that toxic element and your body doesn't have to deal with it, that can make everything work a lot better, which means the medications don't have to work as hard. So it's just one of those things. Monitor everything closely with any protocol, but
Yeah, that's the
especially
goal,
with
to reduce the
zero charge.
bottleneck. Okay, so you mentioned, if you're taking it with other medications, what about other nutraceuticals? So if you're taking it, let's say 30 minutes, 60 minutes post evening meal, uh, do you want to avoid using any other nutraceuticals at that time?
Okay, so this is a really interesting one. So generally, I would say if it's natural, take it at the same time, or you can take it at the same time. If it's synthetic, take it a little bit away just in case. So, and a lot of things we consider natural are actually synthetic, like synthesized, nutrients. So we have to just, when I say synthetic, I mean made in the lab, opposed to made from nature and then, advanced manufacturing practices. But essentially, so if you're concerned with it at all, take the supplement first and let it do its job, and then take the zeolite later. Right? It's better to do that opposed to take the zeolite first, because the zeolite's going to be sticking around in your gut for a while. So if you take and if you take a medication, for example, that is going to get into the bloodstream and be completely out of the gut in 4 hours, or it's half. If you kind of know the half life, if you know stats on like the med, then you can know when to take the zeocharge after. Let's say it goes to the gut, it's into the bloodstream in 30 minutes. Just wait 30 minutes to take the zeocharge, because the zeocharge is not getting to the bloodstream to interact with the med when it's there. It's only in the gut. So same with the supplement when you're taking, and I back to the med. Like, I'm not recommending you take this with any med. Just you have to be careful with it. Check with your practitioner. But with the supplements, same kind of thing. If you want to take a B vitamin or zinc or something else, just take it. Maybe take the zeolite 30 minutes later. Kind of let that do its job. The only thing that the zeolite would potentially bind to in terms of like a natural mineral would be like if you're taking it at the exact same time as like copper or iron, potentially zinc, some of these like heavier, basically they're metals, right? They're not as heavy as the metals that are in the toxic metals, but they still might have an initial binding effect. Now, in your body, the zeolite will not rip out these metals from cells. It would only potentially bind to loose minerals that were just consumed at the exact same time that have not been absorbed by the body yet. So it won't result in deficiency, but it might prevent the absorption of those minerals if taken at the exact same time. But here's where it gets interesting, because zeolite's actually been studied to be used as a delivery system through the swap mechanism. So some people do this, for example, with silver, like a nano silver you mentioned, right? So you could spray the nano silver into the glass of water mixed with zeocharge, and you could drink it at the same time. And what'll happen is the zeolite will bind to the silver, but then as the zeolite particle with the silver in the cage interacts in pretty much any other metal, because they're going to be heavier than silver or preferred by the zeolite, or ammonia, metabolic waste products, mycotoxins, it will exchange the silver for that heavier element in the body. And now you basically have delivered the silver to the binding site of where you grabbed the toxicity. So some people actually do that, and that's experimental. I've done it a number of times, but some people will actually mix things like silver into their zeolite to treat it as a delivery system. The only risk with that would be that if the zeolite structure with the silver does not encounter toxicity, it's one of those particles that doesn't encounter it, the silver might just remain trapped in the zeolite and never be used, and then you flush it out. So you might waste the silver. So I don't recommend mixing them, but even if you mix them together, like if you mix like zinc or something with the zeolite, the zinc is probably going to still be utilized by the body because it's going to be swapped out again. But so I personally will take, zinc or any mineral at the same exact time as the zeocharge, and I have zero concern. And I kind of like that potential swap mechanism, delivery system. But in general, I would say if you're concerned with it, take the zeocharge 30 to 60 minutes after. Like amino acids, things like amino acids and other things, it's not going to bind to it all. Herbs, other binders, if you're combining it with like fulvic and humic acids, I say take it at the same time. If you're combining it with like a chlorella or something, I like actually mixing those together, because some of those are a little bit more stressful. They're a little bit less efficient binders. So as they stir things up, now you have the zeolite to help clean up that mess a little bit, and they work synergistically together. So other binders, herbals, take together. With homeopathy, you're kind of supposed to take that on its own anyway to not mess up the signature, but anything can kind of be taken with it. But strong metal-like substances like silver, iron, copper, zinc, I would just take those 30 minutes before or 60 minutes before if you're
6
concerned.
scoops. That's a lot, right? In some respect, but the concern maybe isn't the dose. The concern is taste, right? So maybe speak to that. Are you combining it? Is it just in water? What people listening in, what can they expect? Because was in a patient call this morning, and a lot of times patients are complaining, oh yeah, the formulations in terms of these powders, because it comes in a powder, you scoop, put it in some water, take it down, very chalky, or people averse to specific taste, flavors, etc. Obviously, it's being kind of a mineral. What is it? Do you just put it in water and take it down, or what do you do?
It's so you can experiment. So it's really nice because like I mix it with water. I think it tastes good. A lot of people think it tastes good. A lot of people don't think it tastes good. So it kind of depends. It's a natural earthy flavor. It's not like nasty like a seaweed or something. It's pretty basic. It's smooth. It's not like some other. If people have tried other zeolite powders and it's they get the sensation like they went to the beach and got sand in their mouth and they can't get it out. It's not that experience because it's finely micronized, so there's no grittiness or no graininess at all. It's a very smooth texture. It's just chalky. If you don't like the taste, it can be mixed with any beverage, hot or cold. So zeolite is not heat sensitive up to thousands of degrees Fahrenheit. You can bake it into baked goods. You can put it in hot tea. You can put it in hot water. So you can basically get it in your body any way you want to, which is really nice. So some parents will try, and we don't have any recipes right now, but you could bake it into, try to bake a little bit into it into a piece of bread or something, but mix it with applesauce, yogurt, whatever it is. What I've done in the past is, and I think it's just absolutely delicious, is like a coconut milk beverage. Get a coconut milk beverage and then mix, like in a blender bottle, mix the zeocharge powder into it, shake it up, and then it completely masks the texture and it makes it a little bit thicker. So it's like, to me, it's almost like a milkshake. Now, other people probably wouldn't think that, but I don't drink milkshakes. So for me, it tastes really good, especially if you add a little bit of sweetener, like a natural sweetener to the coconut milk. If it's not sweetened, then it's like a delicious treat. So that's an option. But any way you can get it down is great. Like for animals, mixing it, I mean, you can make peanut butter treats, mix it with peanut butter, bake it into peanut butter treats, sprinkle it on the food. That's usually the easiest thing. Probably easier than mixing it with the water. And in the animal research, it's always basically mixed with the food. So any
For
way you can
animals,
get it in.
and it's a whole nother discourse. But quickly, I guess maybe allude to that. So, because probably a lot of people have pets, so same amount of dosing, same administration.
Yep. So about like one scoop for 50 pounds of body weight. So, 25 pounds, do a half scoop. It's not an exact science. I mean, you could definitely do more. Like in some of the animal research, they're taking very high doses. And that's why when people think that I'm recommending these mega doses, they're really standard doses. It's just that the industry has literally watered down zeolite with some of the products, but it's basically lowered the dose so much that when we're recommending these gram doses, they're kind of demonized as high doses, but it's more standard. And that's happened with a lot of stuff. It's one, it lowers the cost of the product if you're not offering as much. And then people didn't understand this dosing paradox because I developed and basically discovered this dosing paradox and brought it to light. So now a lot of companies are saying, oh, there's something to this. And that's where if someone has tried a liquid zeolite product before and they've gotten a terrible reaction, they might be an individual that needs a higher dose. And sometimes they can't get a high enough dose with some of the liquids because like a lot of these liquids are like 1 milligram per serving, whereas zeocharge is 5,000 milligrams per scoop. So if someone is very sensitive, there might not be enough binding capacity in the liquid. So it's one of those things. Those are often good candidates for zeocharge, people that have not been able to take some of the others before. But yeah, for animal dosing, they usually do well pretty much with any dose, even just sprinkles. But yeah, I'd say about a scoop for 50 pounds is good. And there's a lot of research on zeolite for animals, including even chickens. I mean, there's research showing that, I mean, besides like egg production and things, but just raising glutathione peroxidase levels in the chickens, raising superoxide dismutase levels in the chickens, binding to lipopolysaccharides in the chickens. Like, so, and just for chickens, and I have clients that do give it to their chickens. You know, it seems to, because it's not a nutrient working on any specific pathway, it seems that it can be given to pretty much any animal because it's literally going in and binding. It's just a matter of some animal, you don't want to give them like massive doses of it that could clog things up and just they can't pass it or something with certain animals, I suppose. But like we've never seen any issues with like dogs. We've got a couple holistic veterinarians that recommend it to the dogs and to the cats and horses, different animals, just because of all the pesticides and things being sprayed on the lawns, not to mention everything else. So yeah.
Any last takeaways, clinical insights, anything else to kind of surmise to leave our audience with?
Yeah, I think the big thing for me is, living in the 21st century, we have to do something to optimize detox. The question is, what is the most effective and efficient way to get this stuff out of our bodies and to get our bodies doing the work for us so we don't have to take as much stuff later, right? Take the stuff now, get the body working better so we don't have to take as much. And then it's just finding that approach, working with someone like yourself that's doing kind of this complete approach where they're not just, because detox is one of the processes of the body that goes along with everything else. And they're all connected. So working on the gut, working on the detox system, working on all this other stuff, mental, emotional, et cetera. For me, I think it's, if someone's just listening from home and they're kind of doing self-care, which is fantastic as well, if you can identify what is causing the most stress, right? What is causing your body to work harder than normal? The hardest, what is the most, the biggest cause of stress in your life? Start with that. Because some people, there's 30 things that's causing them stress and they start with the tiny things. But if there's one thing, let's, for example, like a root canal treated tooth, if you have an infected tooth or an abscess or something that's just causing terrible issues and you do all this other stuff, that is causing so much stress on your body that might need to be addressed. It might be like a circuit breaker or a block, a healing block where you have to, if there's something, if you're doing everything right and you're still not getting results, there might be something else that needs to be addressed. Maybe it's removing breast implants in women. Maybe it's getting the infected tooth out of your mouth. Maybe it's getting the amalgams out of your mouth. Maybe they're causing like an electrical circuit in your mouth and, zapping you every day. There's certain things that if you don't address those, the other results are going to be a little bit more limited because they're taking up so much energy. So start there, start with the big ones. And then the formula for success is doing the right thing plus time equals results. So if you don't get results immediately, and because people see testimonials with ZeoCharge and with other, practitioners and products, and they think that they're going to get the exact results in the same timeline as everyone else, doesn't always work that way. So be patient with it. If you believe in the protocol, you always want to give everything at least 3 months, generally longer, to let the body kind of, get in the zone. But don't try anything for a week and give up on it because you're not feeling incredible, because it's doing the right thing plus time that
Yeah,
equals the
you're
results.
absolutely right. It's about being consistent, right? It's the same thing with when you start exercise. First week you don't see much in the mirror. Second week, still don't see much in the mirror. But after 3 weeks, 12 weeks, 6 months, 1 year, you've now transformed your entire existence. And so the time component is essential. Absolutely right. It's interesting because patients so often are dealing with chronic issues. That's a buildup of sometimes decades, right? And yet they anticipate sometimes false expectation, like I'm going to take a product and do anything. Well, how long did it take you to get sick? So needless to say, no, I agree. The other side of that coin, the caveat though, is there's no single panacea, right? So just like you said earlier, this is a tool in the toolkit. It is a very resourceful tool, very effective tool. We've used this with our patients. And I think the component here is there's specific tools for specific occasions. And while this is exceptional in helping with detoxification, especially metals, especially some of those other intoxicants that we've discussed today, there is no one panacea. And it is important to work, I think, with a practitioner who can provide that roadmap for success. But needless to say, I loved what you presented today. This conversation has definitely exceeded my expectations. I rarely say that, so I appreciate the breadth and depth of our discussion. Where can people learn more, reach out to you?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I enjoyed it as well. So, and hopefully the expectations weren't too low coming in. Hopefully they were normal, and then they still exceeded them. So, one more thing on that you just mentioned that triggered it, kind of an important key, is the consistency aspect. Because one thing that I also do not recommend is taking ZeoCharge for one day and then going off of it to see your response, because that's likely to cause a reaction in sensitive individuals. Because you go in, and sometimes from the initial dose, it stimulates that downstream detox effect where you get the dump of toxicity into the bucket after you clear it. And then your body's counting on the zeolite to come in again to bind that stuff. So if you take it once and the next day you feel awful, or the next 2 days later you feel awful, it's just not a good idea to stop it for the first 30 days. So I'll say that. So don't, when you test the water, generally, if you feel great after the first day, take it again. Don't wait. So I'll say that. For finding me, I would say zeolitelabs.com is our main website. That's going to be the best source of information. We've got a lot of videos. There's information on the dosing, tons of information on dosing. There's an education tab that has all sorts of videos on all sorts of topics. There's also a podcast link on the website where it's called the Detox Experience, but essentially it's a ZeoCharge user feedback podcast. So it's customers that are sharing their experience on ZeoCharge. They talk about, did they experience reactions? Did they not? How did they navigate that? What doses have they tried? What's worked best for them? Symptoms relief, etc. So it's kind of just real people sharing their experiences. That's kind of help people get a little better expectation of what to expect from the product. So, and then we now have an Instagram. I wasn't on socials for my entire life until like 3 months ago, but I hired a lady. She's doing a great job. So she's pumping out content on Instagram at Zeolite Labs. So there's a lot of whatever goes on Instagram, she's doing it there. So Instagram,
I know we're probably going to
zeolitelabs.com. Those are
include
the two main sources.
a code for our listeners here too, as well, and allow people to try it. And like I said, it's definitely worked for myself, my patients. So we can attest to that. Last question I end every episode with is, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
One superpower? Boy, I mean, I think just being in this industry, I would say just helping someone get to where they want to be with their health goals immediately, right? So it would be nice if it didn't take time. And if it's just, it could just be, and maybe, that can be available sometimes with supernatural healing, like, faith in Jesus Christ and things, but that's not always a guarantee for every situation, every person. So if I could do one thing, I would say, be able to talk to someone and solve all of their health problems within 30 minutes. And then they wouldn't have to deal with them again. So I think that would be pretty cool, but maybe it wouldn't be ideal, because I think sometimes we need to put the effort in and we need to go through things, and, it does build character and all that other stuff. So, but yeah, I'm going to go with that one, being able to talk to someone and then all their health problems being gone within 25 to 30 minutes of the conversation.
What if the other side of the coin holds true, right? We need to experience the pain, or we have to go through pain, as you allude to really enjoy pleasure, right? Really find what it means to not live in pain, right?
Yeah. I mean, we wouldn't be having this conversation if I had perfect health my entire life. I would be, selling insurance or something. I don't know.
Anyone that sells insurance on the show who's listening, we all have our roles, and
No, my dad. Yeah, no, I have nothing to get. It's because insurance is huge, and where I live in West Des Moines, Iowa, there's like everyone is in insurance. That's why I said that. Like, I got my insurance license when I was 18 in high school. Like, I started early, so I didn't say that in any derogatory way. But that's why I'm saying, like, I'd probably be doing that. But I'm glad I'm doing this, because not because insurance is bad, but because this is kind of the path I think God's led me on. And through my own pain, like you said, pain to purpose, from my own experiences and what I've learned and what I've gone through, now I'm able to help other people with that. And I think
as we say on all our social channels, our goal is simple. We want to help people heal faster and safer. And so what the product you brought to light here that we discussed today, I think speaks exactly to that. So everyone tuning in, I hope you found this enjoyable. Please like, review, subscribe, share this with someone who could benefit from this information, from this treatment plan, and reach out to myself or Jeff at Zeolite Labs. Obviously, we'll include everything in the show notes. And until next time, stay healthy, stay wealthy, my friends.
Thank you for tuning in to the TBD Fit Podcast on Dr. Talks, where we unpack all things health and longevity. If you enjoy the show, like, review, and subscribe. This allows us to have a greater reach and help others on their health and wellness journey.